It be that time once again, ladies and gentlemen. While I'm on this who is the best at something kick, we're getting into another fan favorite, the best composition for every team in Season 4. This one is a bit more straightforward than the best player at every hero because all we're really doing is looking back at what comp brought about the #1 success rate for every single team. The difficulty of answering this question really will range from team to team because some teams were obviously a lot better at things than others, while some teams weren't really good at anything at all. But I suppose that we'll cross those issues as they come. Let's go from top to bottom in the overall standings, which means that the LA Valiant are up first. And there's really nothing the Valiant were exceptionally good at. I think that kind of goes without saying since they went 0-16. There's only so much to draw from there. If we really start diving into the times where they actually won a map or at least put up a fight, they seem to be at their so-called best on Wrecking Ball, Ana, Echo compositions. It was the exact composition that saw them full hold Philly on Numbani and tie with Shanghai on Volskaya. So hey, that seems more than good enough if you ask me. I really think that the team benefited, if you want to call it that, from Silver 3 having that extra survivability on Ball. That was a pretty big difference maker when it came to the maps where the Valiant at least played okay. Combine that with Molan Run having the occasional pop-off moment, and there you go. That's the Valiant's #1 comp. Okay, Vancouver Titans time. If I had to choose one comp where the team seemed confident in their abilities, it would probably have to be Ball Tracer Diva with Brig Zen as the support line. The final DPS slot is left open just because Vancouver found similar success both with Linkser and Teru, and obviously they play totally different things. When Vancouver utilized this composition or something similar to it, they won their only game of the season and took the London Spitfire to a map 5 all in a 2-week span. Those 2 weeks saw Vancouver output more life than they did for any other part of the season really, or anything combined for that matter. During this brief period of excitement, the team seemed to do really well with following up on the play set up by Changsik's Wrecking Ball. The DPS also had some heroic moments almost every map during the Boston and London matches. The Titans were actually kind of fun to watch during this time, so I can't possibly think of a better answer since they weren't really fun at any other point of the season. On the topic of teams that weren't a ton of fun to watch, how about the London Spitfire? I believe that London's top comp of 2021 was Tracer Hangzhou with Bap, Brig, Orisa Diva. I feel like this type of comp hit closer to home for the guys on this roster who used to play on British Hurricane, since it reminded them of the good times in the past, I guess you could say, where they actually did win games, and these were a lot of the heroes they were playing. The team did a good job of keeping Hottie up and healthy as well, which really helped, because that in turn gave Shax and Sparker more room to maneuver. It was a pretty hard year for Shax, I would say, but the moment that things started to get easier, his Tracer did go alive. Sparker also started to see some increased production as he was hitting arrow after arrow, and at the end of the day, this hero selection helped pull off some of their biggest achievements of the year, like when they beat the Shock on Route 66, or, just beating Vancouver on Map 5 to win their first and only game of the year. It wasn't a pretty season by any means, but at least there were a couple of good moments to salvage when they did play this specific composition. Time for the Guangzhou Charge. This squad was pretty messy, but at the very least, they got a few wins using the Orisa Tracer core with Eileen either on Hangzhou or Cassidy. The Charge failed to find much of a comfort zone this year, but if there was one time where they seemed to at least kind of be clicking, or at least the closest thing to it, it was when they didn't have to worry so much about a ton of hit scan and Widowmaker and all that stuff. Well, there's that, and the fact that the supports weren't constantly letting the tanks down. I think that Rio himself also looked a lot better, seeing as he was on his strongest hero. From there, the team basically just played around Eileen and just all of the other comfort picks with Choi Se-wan on the Tracer and Krong on the Diva, providing a lot of good consistency. This comp allowed for the Charge to go on their only win streak of the year, so that's more than enough evidence to suggest that this was their best comp. Now for the Mayhem, and man does it hurt calling their name so early, but hey, what can you do? To put it simply, Florida were at their best during the first month, and the thing they were constantly pretty good with, at least in my opinion, was Double Bubble with Tracer Break. Having OG and Yaki on their favorite characters made for a deadly combination. When Florida had things figured out, Yaki could carry his team to actual meaningful wins. Throw in BQB on Cassidy or Ash with Gangnam Jin alternating between Zen and Ana, and the Mayhem were legit. The heavy dive stuff saw them keep pace with the best of the best, and a good argument could also be made, I suppose, for OG on ball with Gargoyle on Sigma or maybe D.Va, but OG in my opinion was the most helpful for his team on Monkey. I really loved watching Florida get super aggressive. It benefited their playmakers a lot, and it led to some high quality wins early on. Let's keep things moving along with the Boston Uprising. Honestly, I don't really know if there was one particular comp that truly blew me away with them, because the times they were playing really well, it felt like the comps just weren't lasting. Boston were like consistently okay across the board. It was pretty strange. Part of me wants to go with when they rolled Houston using Genji Dive, but in my opinion, that just wasn't enough. It was when they looked at their absolute best, but it was only for one game, which is a really small sample size and pretty insignificant in the grand scheme of things. I suppose it really does depend on what you value more. If you just simply like when they're at their most dominant, maybe you want to go with the Genji stuff. But if you prefer that comp that gets them the most wins like me, then you're probably going to want to go with Double Bubble. That composition had a presence in at least 4 of their 7 wins, I believe, and it was something they could consistently rely on during their 3-game winning streak. If you want to make an argument for the Rush comp, I could maybe understand that argument as well. But something about that Double Bubble really spoke out to me. That was probably when I thought Boston played their most impressive stretch. Stand 1 plus Gabe Bolsey and or Punk had some kind of connection going on there. And with a backup plan like Valentine and Faith and Myungbong by your side, you've got a couple of quality wins coming your way, even in an up and down season. On to the next 7-win team in the NYXL, and I gotta say, there's one big winner here that stands out for me because I adored the NYXL's Tracer Zen dive. They found a good bit of success on control and escort maps with it, and these just so happen to be the NYXL's 2 best map types win percentage-wise, so it does make a lot of sense. Yakpung was fairly strong on Ball and Winston at times, while Flora and Jonek formed a pretty good duo on Tracer Zen. Aside from that, there was a lot of variation. The off-tank role saw a lot of D.Va and Zarya, and then sometimes you'd have somebody like Feather play Sombra, while other times Guangboon would be playing Hitscan. But the consistency was usually there. It played a role in one of their Philly victories, as well as that big win over a sandbagging Shanghai, and additionally, it was usually something they depended on to at least keep them in a close game. Now we get into our final 7-win team, aka the Hangzhou Spark. Despite the rough year, the answer here is fairly obvious. What else could I really go with besides their Winston, Reaper, Echo, Ana? What else is there to say except that they had a 4-0 qualifier with the thing? They took down Shanghai and Chengdu like they were nothing. They hit a real groove during the June joust with it. I mean, they looked unstoppable for at least a little bit. Gushue was doing his usual thing on Monkey, Shy was an absolute god on the Echo, and MCD was playing like a top Ana player in the league. They cleanly wrecked everybody that stood in their way during the June qualifiers. It's just unfortunate that things had to end so abruptly when the NYXL upset them, but you kind of get the picture, I'd say. Overall, the Spark were clearly at their best during the month of June with that June joust comp of theirs. It really was the one time where it seemed like everybody on the roster could be a difference maker instead of just like Shy putting the team on his back or somebody else. The Spark had a lot of problems, but you gotta appreciate the high level of play that they showed in the June joust. On to everybody's favorite underdog, the Paris Eternal. Maybe my Paris enthusiast will disagree with me here, but I really loved their Orisa comp with Khan on the BAP, Naga on the Echo, and Dridra on the Brig. This was a pretty special combo. In my opinion, they were using that comp in a handful of their most impressive victories on the year. Whether it would be the reverse sweep against the Gladiators, the 5-map thriller against Boston, or one of the blowout wins they got, Paris had some clutch moments with these particular heroes. I really do think that they benefited from having Don hang back a bit more on the Orisa because they could usually provide better support for him that way, and at the same time, Khan could also focus a bit more on making the big plays himself since Don wasn't low HP every 3 seconds. And that's not to say that Don was playing bad, because he really wasn't. It's just, you know, he's playing main tank. You're going to get blown up all the time. Anyway, Onigod also played a very defensive style to help with this kind of stuff, and honestly, I think the team kind of let Naga and Khan do the rest on their signature heroes. Everybody felt so dependable. It was the most complete Paris looked the whole year, and I can only imagine how many more games they could have won or at least have been in if this meta lasted longer. But regardless, they should be proud of the way they looked with it. It was a pleasure to watch. The Toronto Defiant. You know, when I first started writing the script for their section of this video, I wasn't quite sure what to think, but then I started thinking about how things went for them after picking up Aspire, and the answer became crystal clear. I'd say their best comp was Sombra, Tracer, Dive. I especially liked them a lot when Lastro was on Zen, which to me seemed like his best hero for sure. Aspire and Hisu were so great at their respective roles as well, though. I mean, they deserve a lot of credit. As a prolific Sombra Tracer duo, they could hold their own against a lot of decent teams. The close wins against Paris definitely stick out in my mind when thinking about their success on this comp, but also the wins over Washington and Florida. Toronto were never a top-tier team last year, but even some of the stronger teams in the league had to watch their backs when Toronto broke this out. Their three most important playmakers could all thrive in this situation, and I'd say at least half of their wins involved this comp for at least part of the game, so the answer was a no-brainer. On to the Washington Justice. For me, the answer seems pretty simple. The Justice seemed the most in their element on Tracer, Echo, Dive with a Winston. To put it simply, Decay usually put in the most work on Tracer. I think that kind of goes without saying. He could pretty much take anybody in the league on her, but then you add in Mag on his most iconic hero. Winston allows for him to reach his highest playmaking potential. He was statistically one of the best Winston players in the league, and the gameplay backs it up. Speaking of having things get backed up, Mag definitely did have a lot of great help and an absolute Rockin' Fury's diva to help him every step of the way on those coordinated dives, which led to a pretty nice dive comp overall. Additionally, I feel like Echo was Assassin's best hero from a consistency standpoint. His Sombra also was relied on quite a bit, but it had a lot of ups and downs, too many in fact. When all of the main playmakers were rocking their comfort picks, the Justice played with confidence, which was obviously a problem for this group given their 9-7 record. But what about the Philly Fusion? What was an inconsistent team like them any good at? I'd say they were fairly strong on Rush. I think they would have had a better time last year if this comp was more relevant because they could hold their own against anybody with it. It appeared to offer them some great stabilization. Rascal's iconic Mei was very advantageous. His experience and abilities on that hero proved to be huge, but then you factor in Carpe's consistency on Cassidy and Alarm's out-of-this-world playmaking on Baptiste, and Philly become really scary. Rush comps were like the one time where I saw the consistency I was expecting out of this group for the entire year. Many of their victories on the season involved Rush at one point or another, and the times where they couldn't play it at all usually resulted in losses that were a bit more lopsided. On Rush, they were capable of putting teams in their place, and if they weren't dominating, it was at least giving them a shot at staying alive in a series, as seen by their early season encounter with the Shanghai Dragons. They got stuff done, enough said. Speaking of good Rush teams, that gets us into the Houston Outlaws, and yeah, I kinda just gave away the answer for this one, but I also feel like it was relatively clear. When did they pull off their biggest feats? When were they getting talked about the most? It was during the first few weeks. And what was their primary comp during this time? Rush. Houston showcased many of their best performances on the year using Rush. A fair argument could also be made for Double Shield, since Piggy could go off on the Sigma and Dante could be more relevant on something like Echo or Tracer, but they weren't really winning as consistently. That was the problem. Rush comp saw them win the most. In fact, there were some instances where Houston was getting beat pretty badly on Double Shield. It was way less likely to see the Outlaws get rolled on Rush. That was a very rare occurrence. Piggy and Dante are the two biggest playmakers of the team, but that does not necessarily mean that the Outlaws were always in the most ideal spot if the meta revolved around their top heroes. You have confidence in those guys to show up no matter what the meta ends up being, you know? Which is why Rush was so perfect for them. It allowed for the other guys to pop off even more, while Piggy and Dante could still be productive. Jungkook arguably played his best Overwatch during the May Melee on Reinhardt. Think about Juby as well. It goes without saying that Lucio is what he's known for, so he looked at his best in that particular comp too. And then you have Crimzo's BAP, which was otherworldly, and Happy, he seemed to have some of his best moments when he could play Cassidy and Hanzo. It worked better for the team as a whole this way. The results say it all. Dante and Piggy were still effective, while the rest of their team could flourish in the field of their comfort. You gotta love the early Houston Rush comp. It was pretty awesome. Transitioning to the Seoul Dynasty, my pick for them is a little weird. It's oddly specific, but I very much loved when they played Orisa comps with Tracer. When Seoul started to impress me late into the year, it involved a resurgence from Gesture. Part of the big reason he came back so strong was because Seoul were so willing to break out that Orisa. That's always been a strong hero of his, and this year proved to be no different. Seoul had their moments on dive as well, but they also had a lot of ugly moments in return, but the bunker stuff seemed a bit more reliable. There was no reason to worry about a lack of communication with dives. Gesture could simply sit back and be a difference maker while Prophet popped off. Prophet, in my opinion, was at his most lethal this year on Tracer, so pairing him and Gesture up like this is bound to make for a sick comp. Their synergy on those heroes goes way back, and when you factor in how good of a job Fitz was doing on things like Hangzhou and Cassidy and Ashe, the dynasty felt very complete from a playmaking standpoint. Those three were thriving during the final weeks of the year on this kind of stuff, and the rest of the team followed suit right behind them. Even Creative would join in from time to time when he got to break out the Zen. This comp was very much responsible for part of the reason why they made the Countdown Cup tournament, and it's part of why they beat Philly and they took Shanghai to a map 5. It meant everything to them at a crucial part of their season where they desperately needed to win if they wanted any sort of chance of not having to go through the play-ins. Now obviously, they came up short of that goal when it was all said and done, but they kept their hopes alive in August partially thanks to this composition. And considering that Seoul were always falling short of making that tournament Final Four beforehand, this slowly but surely became the right choice when doing the preparations for this video. On to the San Francisco Shock. This one ended up being a toss-up. I had a choice to make between their Winston Moira Rush and the traditional Reinhardt Rush. Those were the two comps that saw San Francisco be the most competitive. Their Winston stuff saw them put up decent results in the short term, but I think Rush saw more value over the span of the entire year, so that's what I'm gonna go with here. I was tempted to avoid the Rush comp because it certainly had ups and downs, but when thinking about it logically, that was a comp they consistently held their own on and could rely on when they really needed it. They could go blow for blow with the top Rush teams in the league. Atlanta, Houston, Dallas, they were all teams they could keep up with or defeat. Not to mention that any team below that tier usually fell victim to their dominance. With Super leading the way, the Shock could feel good about themselves in any sort of Rush meta. Nero's Mei was also relatively solid, and FD God could give you his full potential since he was playing Lucio. Again, the Shock's Rush comp didn't always look superb, but it definitely did help them get a fair share of wins on the year and have some close games against top competition. It was a pillar of consistency that the Shock often could not find when playing something else. The Atlanta Reign. Some people might get mad at me here, and I could totally understand why, but I'm going with their Rush composition as their best comp of Season 4. Picking Double Shield or something that involves Pelican playing Echo might sound more appealing, and I could totally understand if you feel that way, but their Rush comp felt totally unstoppable at times. We talk about Pelican's Echo and how great that was, but think about his Mei as well. In my opinion, it was the best in the entire league, and if he wasn't on Mei, he could be seen tormenting those dive-happy teams on Torb. But something else I arguably liked even more about Atlanta's Rush comp is that Masa gets to play that Lucio of his. He has more of a commanding presence to him when he gets to play that signature character. He becomes far more capable of making those game-changing decisions and big plays. I very much prefer his Lucio over the rest of his hero pool. And think about also what it means for his partner Iris. It makes his life a lot easier when the main support that he has is a little more reliable. And I mean, Iris himself was a beast since he got access to that crazy BAP of his. And you already know that Gator and Kai and Hawk, they're all going to be feeling right at home with Cassidy, Ryan, and Diva. Atlanta were arguably the best Rush team in 2021, so I really have no other choice here. They asserted their dominance against anybody basically who tried to match them on it. They could beat Dallas, they could give the Shock trouble, anyone you can imagine, and it made for a pretty sick counter comp against those really good dive teams. It truly was old reliable for them, that's all there really is to say. As we move on to the LA Gladiators, I couldn't help but think that this was pretty easy too. Based off of what they showed me in the Countdown Cup, I'd be a fool to go with anything else except for Orisa BAP, Brig, Tracer, Diva, with Bird Ring on anything he wants to play. I mean, come on, this is what they used at their absolute peak. They used this to win the Countdown Cup crown. We're talking the best BAP and Brig in the game arguably, with Space on his main hero and Kevster on his. There is a disgusting amount of playmaking potential present with this kind of thing. Any of those guys could go off at any given moment, or better yet, a few of them at the same exact time. How many times do we see Kevster, Shu, or Birdring absolutely erupt during the final month of the year? It was non-stop. It's rare to see something benefit every member of the team so much. Easy choice, no second thoughts. The Chengdu Hunters. Yeah, that's a pretty easy one too. If you're not going with the Ball Tracer Pharmacy comp, then please don't talk to me. It was their bread and butter. Ball has always been Chengdu's signature tank to build around, but this year was even more dominant than it's ever been before. It had the same chaotic energy as before, but with more competence and scarier playmakers. Gaga had a promising start to his career. Jinmu really did the work on Pharah, Yveltal was as consistent as ever on that Mercy, and Leaf played at an MVP level on Tracer. Just a disgusting combo that made even making the strongest teams in the league tremble in fear. They made back-to-back tournament finals for a reason, you know, and I don't know if they make these two finals if it weren't for this comp. That second half of the year really saw them figure some things out, and most of the time it was when they were utilizing this. The Ball, Pharah, Mercy, and Tracer were the main components, but there are also some other things that were fairly interchangeable. Sometimes you'd see Monk on Zen, or maybe Ana, with Late Young usually on D.Va or Zarya. Just a killer combination from this Chengdu squad, like really hard to adjust to. That's about all I've got for Chengdu though, so how about we discuss the Dallas Fuel? They were pretty good on, well, literally anything they played basically. There's no place you could really go wrong here, but if we're talking top of the line hero picks, the safe selection has to be a Winston-based comp. Some might say their Sombra Tracer variant was the best, but I preferred their Winston Rush. I don't think there was ever a time I felt more confident in the Fuel. Totally investing in the play of Fearless resulted in some very convincing victories that saw them narrowly miss out on a Junjoust championship. They lost 2 games during this tournament in its qualifiers, and each loss came down to the final map. They accompanied those 2 competitive losses with 7 victories, and a lot of those felt pretty effortless. It took the Shanghai Dragons, the Grand Finals champion Shanghai Dragons, the equivalent of 2 games to adjust to that kind of style, and that's a big statement. This Winston Rush comp truly emphasized everything that Dallas players excelled on. As I said, Fearless did so much on the Winston. Then you have Hanbin, who was killer on D.Va, Fielder, who by far the best Moira with the crazy amount of healing he was dishing out, Lucio and Jexay, that was a good match, that was his most proficient hero. Then Sparkle and Doha were very productive on Echo, Reaper, or anything else the team made them use. It was up there as probably the most or one of the most Dallas-friendly comps you'll ever see. The results speak for themselves. In my opinion, this was the time of year when Dallas looked the most clean and decisive. There weren't so many struggles compared to their crazy run the month before. So yeah, it's gotta be this one for me. Dallas could fully invest in their most important players while simultaneously making sure that everybody else could still thrive. But now it's time to end things. Let's get into the final team, aka the Shanghai Dragons. To put it simply, the Dragons didn't really suck at anything. They were competitive basically no matter what. But when you think about the peak of their dominance, Ball Sombra Dive instantly comes to mind. No team could match their level of play. Even Chengdu's Ball comp fell short, which is absolutely terrifying to think about. A lot of their competition didn't even bother trying to match them in the mirror because they knew how pointless it was. At that point, you're basically winning the battle before it even begins. Why do you think Atlanta tried so hard to beat them through other means in the grand finals? They were too good, even for the strongest teams in the league. They pretty much had that composition down to a science. Fate set up his team well with excellent wrecking ball play, and the rest of his team did a good job with the follow-up. Then you had Lip, who was farming EMPs like they were nobody's business. Those two by themselves were extremely oppressive to deal with, but they only tell like less than half the story because you gotta deal with Fletta's diverse hero pool, and Void and Lee Jae-gon's consistency, as well as Izuyaki's deadly Ana and Zenyatta. The synergy, the team play, the colossal explosiveness, it was just far too much to handle. I've talked about how deadly a bunch of other teams were on their respective comfort picks, but the Dragons definitely take the cake. They were an absolute machine who showed no mercy. It's really unfair when you think about it. The comp they played was arguably the most powerful when used correctly, so the fact that they had it down better than anybody else meant an instant advantage. You get the point. Shanghai and the Sombra Ball Dive was OP. Aside from that though, that's basically all the comments I have to say about the Dragons and all of the other teams. That in my opinion is the best composition for every team from the 2021 Overwatch League year. Do you agree with my list, or do you think that some changes need to happen? Let me know what you're thinking in the comments below. And if you want more content similar to this, make sure to give this video a like and subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. And as always, thank you all so much for watching. I really appreciate your support, and until next time, this is ATP, signing out. Peace.